Hi, everyone. It's December 11th, 2021, and it's been a long time since I've been behind the microphone. It's been a long time since the last episode. As I said earlier, I'm going to do as much as I can with this project, but I am a one-man operation here, and this is a side project compared to everything else I have in my life, other obligations. So I do apologize for being away for so long, but, that's the way it is sometimes. This next semester in the spring, I should have a bit of a more flexible schedule, not quite as much of a schedule that's going to require so much commitment. So I should have a bit more time to be working on the podcast. I do have a few announcements. So a couple weeks ago, I was interviewed by Shankar Singham for the Red Star Report. And there's a couple parts to that interview that should be posted or released either this weekend or the next. I think he was going to break it up into two parts. But we had a really good conversation about economics and modern monetary theory and currency, what would be the possibilities or the potentialities for California having its own currency, and what would that mean? I tried to answer all of Shankar's questions as best I could, and also indicate where I might not have the expertise to give a complete answer to some of the questions that he was asking. So please visit Red Star Report, their YouTube channel or Facebook page, where you can find that interview that should be coming out soon. Also, I have some interviews scheduled for this coming spring. I'm really trying to reach out to a larger number of people this December and January and schedule interviews for the few months going into the spring and then into the summer. Before I go on to the main topic for today, which this isn't going to be a long episode, but before I get to just a few comments I want to make on the main topic, maybe let's just think about what's happened just in the couple months since I had my last episode. So I think the last thing that I talked about that was a current event was the three things that signaled to me the dysfunction in Washington, D.C. So I spent some time talking about the funding crisis. So the fact that the federal government was having these recurring crises over just funding the government so that it could operate and not shut down. I talked about the debt ceiling and how that was an issue that kept recurring and how it's really a pointless issue. And I talked about the Build Back Better, so the infrastructure bills that were in the House and the Senate. So what has happened with regard to those three issues? Well, we revisited the funding crisis again, I guess you could call it. And there was another deadline, and they just, barely passed a bill to fund the government for a little while longer before the deadline came up. This has happened so many times that, honestly, it really didn't even merit much attention in the press. I guess because this happens so often that I think we've just become accustomed to it, which is really sad. So that happened once again, and I think we have another deadline that's be coming up in a few more months. I honestly haven't even looked into it because at this point, what's the point in looking into it? The debt ceiling. We have this issue to deal with again. The latest deadline, according to what I've read now, is December 15th. Okay, so got to raise it by December 15th. So this is another one of these issues that just keeps coming over and over again, keep dealing with it. And it's something that's been happening for so long that, again, it's something that I don't really think people pay much attention to. And honestly, they shouldn't, because it's happened so often that it's just kind of blended into the background, which again is sad. As far as the infrastructure bills, So the progressives, they caved. I'm not too happy with them. They signed off on the hard infrastructure bill, and so that has been passed. And Democrats think this is going to be some kind of way that's going to save them in the midterms. Not sure about that. But the soft infrastructure, the Build Back Better bill that contains some additional kind of social spending and other items in it, that has still not been passed. It's been passed in the House, and it's awaiting now in the Senate. The Senate where all good ideas and all good projects go to die. And so we're facing, this theater that goes on in the Senate. We have people like Lindsey Graham, who's, calling this a spending orgy. Well, Lindsey, wait till you get a hold of how much money we're spending on the military. I mean, if you think this is a lot, man, I really hope to hear from you on the news coming up when you find out how much more we're spending on the military than what this bill is proposing. And the Republicans and Fox News, the rest of the right-wing echo chamber, are decrying this bill as a path to socialism. It's so comical, I don't know what to say. I mean, just to be clear, public spending, in and of itself, that is not socialism. And this kind of language that they're using around, this is socialism, this is communism, on one hand, like I said, you can laugh at it because it's really comical. On the other hand, there is a more serious take that we need to think about, and I'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about the main topic. And that has to do with the fact that when liberal democracies start to freeze up, when they become dysfunctional, when they're unable to address crises, the conservative wing of the government tends to use this socialism, communism label as a way to discredit anything on the left, and also as a way to signal their alliance or allegiance to the proto-fascists, what they consider now their best chance of making an alliance to get anything done in government. And that is a little bit scarier to think about. And as I said, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. But those are the three issues we talked about before. And really, it's no better now, several weeks later, a couple months later, than it was the last time I talked about them. The other major item that's been in the news, of course, is the recent SCOTUS hearings, the oral arguments on abortion. And yes, it is true. I'm sure everybody is familiar with some of the coverage on this, the likelihood that Roe v. Wade is going to be, if not overturned, then gutted to an extent that it will be effectively overturned. I'm not going to talk too much about the two abortion cases for the moment. I do have a guest that I would like to have on. Hopefully they'll be accepting very soon. We can set up a meeting where I really want to talk about this topic in a lot more detail. But for now, let's just say that this is really disheartening. It's definitely a setback. And it just goes to show that we are at the mercy of the federal courts. We're at the mercy of the Supreme Court. And you could say, well, wait a second. Abortion, they're just going to leave this to the states. So that doesn't really affect California because obviously we're not going to ban abortion here. Well, I'm not so sure about that. So 2 quick points. It is entirely possible, if I'm not mistaken, Congress can act on this. So Congress can pass laws that, have to do with reproductive rights and abortion, and those bills can be signed by the president. So it is conceivable, I'm not saying it's likely, but it is conceivable if Republicans win the House and the Senate in 2024, and they win the presidency, whether it's Trump or someone else, they could, in principle, just pass a law through Congress banning abortion entirely in all 50 states. And again, unless I'm mistaken, that is a possibility. And what are we going to do then? Second point. Even if the issue of abortion is left to the states, it is also possible that Congress and the president, if the GOP controls all of those branches, could pass a law that that forbids crossing state lines to get an abortion, and also criminalizes anyone who assists or helps someone to cross state lines to get an abortion. In fact, there was a failed Georgia bill. Georgia state legislature had a bill proposed that was knocked down, but part of it did say that it would make it illegal for anybody to assist a Georgian to cross state lines and get an abortion. And effectively what this meant is that Georgia could ask to kind of extradite a doctor in Illinois or California or some other state simply for assisting someone getting an abortion, and they would be, I guess, charged and brought to court. I mean, this is really, bizarro stuff. This is the least, I think, that we have to look forward to. I really think people who think that once Roe v. Wade is overturned, assuming it is overturned, that this is just going to be the end of it. It's not the end of it. They're just going to push for more measures. They're just going to push the envelope further. I don't put any of this past them. Anyway, that's just my quick thoughts on that. Also, regarding the Supreme Court, there is another really important case that is before the court that is really going under the radar that very few people are talking about. But there's a case, it's American Hospital Association v. Becerra. Yes, that's the Becerra that you're thinking of. And it has to do with the so-called Chevron doctrine or Chevron deference. Now, this was a 1984 case that essentially said that agencies of the federal government have some latitude or freedom in the interpretation of the text of bills that pass Congress. In other words, if you want to legislate, say, air quality control, then the agency has to have some freedom to set standards. You know, they're going to have some experts that are going to set the standards. Those specific guidelines do not have to be written into the text of the bill. It would be ridiculous, to expect that the Congress people would be writing these, specific guidelines that all these agencies make into law. And anytime they wanted to change them, or they had to alter them a bit, or they had to use their judgment, they would have to sign another bill, or, it's not really their province to be doing that. They should be setting the general tenor and the goals of the legislation. And then the agencies should be free to enact that using their own judgment and their own expertise. And this case in 1984 that has to do with Chevron basically said, yes, that's constitutional, and that is what the agencies should be doing. And this case, American Hospital Association v. Becerra, is directly challenging this deference. And it's asking the court to consider this precedent and possibly overturn it, which would really dismantle the kind of administrative state and the federal government. Now, I'm not going to be defending the entire enormous bureaucracy of the federal government. However, the idea that these agencies don't have the freedom to interpret the law and make their own judgments about how to execute the law, to me, is preposterous. And I don't see what's going to happen if this is overturned. I mean, this case is as important for the workings of the federal government, especially the executive branch, as these abortion cases are for reproductive rights and for other social issues. So, yeah, these are two big cases. Again, only one of them is really getting a lot of press coverage. The other one is not being talked about much, but I would keep an eye on it. I'll leave a couple links in the notes where you can go and read more about it. Finally, we're a couple months later into the year, and still there's no real consequences for those responsible for January 6th, those responsible for the attempt to overturn the election. We just keep reading more and more about these subpoenas that are issued and people ignoring the subpoenas. And then you have to go through this big, long process to indict people. And, I don't think these people are ever going to be held to account. Mark Meadows just said, nope, I'm not going to show up. And you really can't force these people to show up. You can't force them to testify, to give over information or evidence. You can throw them in jail. You can throw them in prison, I guess. But maybe that's a price they're willing to pay. I mean, so I don't see where this is going. It's been 11 months, almost a year now, and there's no real consequence for anyone except, the less powerful people at the bottom. But the people who are really in charge of this or made arrangements for it, the people who organized some of these things, there's been no accountability for them. And the clock is running out. We have the midterms coming up, and when the Democrats lose the House, which they're going to lose the House, that's 99.9% certain. When the Democrats lose the House, that's the end of this. So, yeah, you only got a little bit of time left, and I don't know what they're doing. Dawdling. Okay, main topic I want to talk about for just a few minutes today. I'm going to talk about the F word. Not that F word, the other F word. So I have used the word fascism at various times over the past few episodes. I know that a lot of people in the California independence movement use this word to describe movements that are happening in America, to describe various organizations or individuals. And I just want to make a few quick comments just to clarify some things. I want to talk about this a lot more, but these are just some initial comments. Number one, this word is used a lot. It's overused, I think. And it's used by people just as a general term to say, they don't like something, or something seems a little authoritarian, or, they have some disagreement with an authority. Then they'll just say, oh, they're just fascists. That is not what this is. When I use the term, I use it in a very specific sense. I use it in the scholarly sense, the academic sense. I use it in the specific sense in political science. Fascism is not the same as authoritarianism. Fascism is a form of authoritarianism, but not every authoritarian regime is fascist. They're not the same thing. A military dictatorship, or really any dictatorship, is not fascist. So there's a distinction between fascism and dictatorship. So that's the first thing I want to point out, is that I do not throw around this term lightly. I don't throw it around just as a way of saying, oh, I hate these people. I don't like what they're doing, so they're fascists. No, I am using it in a specific way. Second point, when we talk about fascism, I think it's important to recognize that fascism is a little bit different than other ideologies. The three major ideologies that developed, I would say, up to the early to mid 20th century, roughly you could classify them as liberalism is one of them, conservatism is another, and socialism. And fascism is a fourth, but it's different than the other three. And the major difference is that it's a lot less committed to philosophical, ideological underpinnings. In other words, it's much more able to accommodate itself to the situation, and it can change its beliefs depending upon the circumstances. I've been reading this book by Robert O. Paxton. It's called The Anatomy of Fascism. It's considered one of the definitive works on fascism, and he goes through a description of especially Italy and Germany, but other fascist movements throughout history. And it's kind of a scary read, to be honest. There are definitely parallels to things that I see happening right now. And what we have to understand is that fascism is a movement, so it doesn't necessarily have to take power. You can have a fascist movement that doesn't take power. But fascism is a movement that originates from the empty space left by failing, well-developed liberal democracies. So, for instance, you don't have fascism in colonial regions because they don't have long-established, really institutionalized liberal democratic framework and institutions. So that's the situation where this arises. You have to have a democracy that's been around for some time, that's fairly well developed. It has institutions that have some historical weight, that carry some authority. And then you have to have some crises that happen, and you have to have a breakdown. So there's a few things that are very common when these movements arise and when they take power: gridlock, polarization, dysfunction, an inability for the, I would say, parliamentarian, because in most places they have a parliamentary system, and so that's the style of government they have, and we don't quite have that here. But a breakdown in the legislative process, a breakdown in the parliamentary system that's unable to address what's happening, that's unable to address the problems. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, it should, because it seems to me that's exactly what's happening in the United States right now. The United States lives under, I believe, the oldest written constitution. It has very old institutions, which have been around for over 200 years. It's a highly developed and entrenched liberal democracy. And we're seeing that it's unable to address problems now, right? So I said that the things that lead to the empty space that fascism fills are dysfunction. We have that. Washington cannot get anything done. It's just impossible to get anything done. Polarization. Well, I think we're seeing that in spades at the moment. Political polarization in the country, and a freezing up of institutions that are unable to address pressing problems and pressing issues. And I mean, look at what we have to deal with now. We have climate change. We have the pandemic. We have inequality, economic inequality, wealth inequality. We have recession that we had at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, we have kind of come back from that a bit, but I still think there's some underlying issues that remain from that. We have the supply chain crisis. There's inflation, although I think that's not really being reported accurately, but that is also an issue. And of course, we have the ever-present issue of racism and racial inequities in the U.S., which has really been there from the beginning and has never been addressed, and those are coming to the fore. So there's multiple issues and crises that are coming before the country, and it's just not able to address it. So these are the ingredients, and this is why we're seeing the kind of movements that we're seeing on the right, these kind of authoritarian, proto-fascist movements, which, I think Trumpism and Make America Great Again, I think it's a fascist movement. I think it checks off most of the boxes for the kind of constellation of qualities that a fascist movement has. And I'm not going to argue that right now, but I think that's supported when you look at the common qualities of fascist movements and then you look at what we're seeing today. So those are just some quick comments I wanted to make, just to clarify that when I use this terminology and when I use this language, and I know that a lot of us do, a lot of us use this language, I know I don't use it lightly. I don't think other people use it lightly. And I think we need to have a discussion about what it really is. We shouldn't just throw around these terms and just assume everybody understands why we're using them or what we mean when we say them. All right, that's it for today. Please visit the YouTube channel and subscribe there if you haven't already, Facebook page. And please visit Red Star Report and subscribe to their YouTube channel, their Facebook page, and look for my interview there over the next week or two. And also the California National Party. Give them a look. They're at californianational.party. Okay. Have a good weekend. I'll talk to you later.